What if everything you believe about where you come from is incomplete, not wrong, just painfully unfinished? What if your story didn't begin with birth, DNA, or history, but with a slow, forgetting, a quiet descent from clarity into craving? Across civilizations, we've searched for our origin in stars, fossils, and equations. Yet Buddhism whispers something unsettling. The real mystery isn't how humans began, but how we fell asleep along the way. And if that's true, then the most important discovery isn't buried in the past, it's hidden in this very moment. Stay with this story, because by the end, you may never look at your life or yourself the same way again. If this kind of reflection speaks to you, support our journey by subscribing to Buddhism in Every Moment. Your support helps us continue creating deep, meaningful videos that bring ancient wisdom into modern life. Subscribe now and walk this path with us, one mindful moment at a time. The question does not arrive politely. It doesn't knock on the door of the mind and wait to be invited in. It enters unannounced, often at the most inconvenient moments, when life has finally gone quiet enough for us to hear it. Where do humans come from? It surfaces when the noise fades, when ambition pauses, when the calendar no longer distracts us. It appears late at night, staring at the ceiling, after a long day of pretending we know where we're going. It appears while driving on an empty highway, the city lights dissolving behind us, the road stretching forward with no clear promise of arrival. It appears in moments of success that strangely feel hollow, and in moments of loss that feel far too heavy to explain away with logic. This question is older than language, yet it feels painfully personal. Because beneath it hides another question we rarely say out loud: why am I here, and why does it feel like something essential is missing? Modern life gives us answers quickly, confidently, and loudly. Biology tells us we are the result of evolution, survival, and chance. History tells us we are shaped by culture, geography, and circumstance. Psychology tells us we are the sum of childhood experiences and neural patterns. These explanations are not wrong, but they are incomplete. They describe the mechanics of existence, not the ache that hums beneath it. There is a quiet dissatisfaction that follows many people through adulthood. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it wears a suit. Sometimes it drives a nice car. Sometimes it smiles in family photos. But it's there a subtle sense that life is moving, yet something within us remains untouched. We keep upgrading our surroundings while the inner question remains stubbornly unanswered. Where do humans come from? Buddhism does something unexpected with this question. It doesn't rush to answer it. It doesn't offer a creation story, a cosmic architect, or a single defining moment where everything began. Instead, it slows the question down until it becomes uncomfortable. And then it turns it inward. Because from the Buddhist perspective, the danger is not that we don't know our origin. The danger is that we think knowing it will save us. In the West, especially in American culture, we are trained to believe that every problem has a solution if we gather enough information. If something feels wrong, we analyze it. If something hurts, we explain it. If something confuses us, we search until the confusion collapses into clarity. We trust answers. We trust data. We trust explanations. And yet, despite all of this knowing, anxiety rises. Depression spreads quietly. Burnout becomes normal. Loneliness hides behind constant connectivity. Buddhism observes this pattern and gently asks, what if the question itself is misdirected? Not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are meant to be lived through. Some are meant to dissolve, not through explanation, but through awareness. The Buddhist view begins with an unsettling proposal. The human story does not start with creation, it starts with forgetting. Not forgetting facts, but forgetting presence, forgetting clarity, forgetting the nature of experience itself. This is not a dramatic fall from heaven, nor a moral failure stamped into our DNA. It is subtler than that. It is the gradual drift from simplicity into complexity, from immediacy into distraction, from being into becoming. And once that drift begins, we spend our lives trying to recover something we can't quite name. Look closely at everyday life. People are not only chasing success, they are chasing relief. Relief from restlessness. Relief from the sense that time is slipping through their hands faster than they can hold it. Relief from the pressure to define themselves, prove themselves, and secure a future that never quite feels secure enough. Even joy has become conditional. We allow ourselves to feel at peace only when certain boxes are checked, when goals are met, when circumstances align, when control feels firm. And the moment any of this shifts, as it always does, the peace evaporates. Buddhism does not interpret this as a personal failure. It sees it as a natural outcome of misunderstanding, where we come from and, more importantly, how we are experiencing the present. The tradition suggests that human beings are not broken. We are simply distracted so deeply, so habitually, that distraction feels like reality itself. We live inside stories about who we are, where we're going, and what must happen next in order for life to finally begin. And in doing so, we miss the only place life ever actually unfolds now. This is why the question of origin matters, but not in the way we expect. From the Buddhist lens, asking where do humans come from is not about tracing a historical timeline. It is about understanding how suffering arises, moment by moment, how dissatisfaction is born, how craving takes shape, how identity hardens, how fear quietly becomes the background noise of our lives. Because once we see that clearly, the question changes. It stops pointing backward and starts pointing inward. In the United States, the dominant narrative celebrates forward motion, growth, progress, expansion, bigger dreams, better versions. There is beauty in this drive, but there is also exhaustion. We are constantly becoming, rarely arriving. Even rest has become productive. Even mindfulness is sometimes treated like a tool to optimize performance rather than a doorway into understanding. Buddhism offers a radical pause. It does not ask us to abandon ambition or withdraw from life. It asks us to examine the cost of never stopping to ask what we are actually seeking beneath all this motion. Because perhaps the most unsettling possibility is this: what if we already arrived long ago, and everything since has been an attempt to escape a discomfort we never learned to sit with? The Buddhist view suggests that humans come from conditions, not a single event, but a continuous unfolding shaped by attention, intention, and habit. We are born not just from parents, but from patterns of wanting, from reactions repeated so often they feel like identity, from a mind that learned, very early on, to grasp at what feels good and push away what feels uncomfortable. This grasping is not dramatic at first. It starts innocently. A preference, a desire, a small attachment. But over time, these preferences solidify into narratives. I am this kind of person. I need this to be okay. I can't be with that feeling. And slowly, the world becomes a place we navigate defensively rather than openly. The Buddhist insight here is quietly profound. Suffering does not come from life being difficult, it comes from resisting life as it is. And resistance is born the moment we forget how to be present with experience without immediately trying to control it. This forgetting is the true origin story of humanity in Buddhism. Not a beginning in time, but a beginning in misperception. And once misperception takes root, everything else follows naturally: fear, comparison, insecurity, craving, conflict. Entire societies grow around these patterns. Economies, identities, and belief systems emerge to manage the discomfort of never quite feeling at home in the present moment. Yet Buddhism insists that this forgetting is not permanent. It is not a curse. It is not a flaw embedded in who we are. It is a habit, and habits can be seen, understood, and gently undone. This is where the story becomes quietly hopeful. Because if humans did not come from a single act of creation, but from a gradual drift away from awareness, then returning does not require becoming something new. It requires remembering. Remembering how to be still without disappearing. How to feel without drowning. How to exist without constantly narrating existence. The question, where do humans come from, then transforms into something far more intimate. Where did I lose touch with myself? And that question does not demand an answer. It invites an experience. Buddhism does not promise certainty. It offers clarity. It does not hand us a map of the past. It invites us to look directly at the present, at the sensations in the body, the movements of the mind, the emotions we habitually avoid or cling to. It asks us to notice how suffering is built, layer by layer, not by fate or failure, but by misunderstanding. This is why the Buddhist approach can feel unsettling at first. It does not give us something to believe in, it gives us something to observe. And observation is intimate. It leaves no room for spiritual bypassing or philosophical distance. It brings us face to face with ourselves, exactly as we are. But within that confrontation lies an unexpected relief. Because if suffering has an origin, it also has an end. And that end does not live in some distant future or perfected version of ourselves. It lives in attention, in honesty, in the willingness to stop running from the present moment long enough to understand it. So when Buddhism speaks of human origins, it is not telling a story meant to impress the intellect. It is offering a mirror. One that reflects not where we began in time, but how we are beginning, again and again, in every moment we either wake up or drift further into habit. And this is only the beginning of the story. Because once we stop asking where humans come from as a historical puzzle, a deeper journey opens. One that explores time without a beginning, worlds that rise and fall, and a human life that, despite its fragility, holds a rare and dangerous power, the ability to wake up in the middle of the story. And that changes everything. There is something deeply unsettling about a teacher who refuses to answer the question everyone is desperate to have answered. When people approached the Buddha and asked about the origin of the universe, whether it had a beginning, whether it would end, whether the human soul was eternal or finite, they expected clarity. They expected authority. They expected, at the very least, an explanation that would quiet the mind and give it something solid to stand on. Instead, they were met with silence, or worse, with a refusal. At first glance, this feels almost cruel. Why withhold answers from those who are genuinely searching? Why turn away from the grand questions that have haunted humanity across centuries and civilizations? Why not simply explain where everything came from and put the mystery to rest? But Buddhism is not interested in satisfying curiosity. If curiosity leads us further away from freedom, this is where the Buddhist path becomes deeply countercultural, especially to a modern American audience trained to equate knowledge with safety. We are conditioned to believe that if we understand something fully enough, it can no longer hurt us. That clarity will bring control. That answers will bring peace. And yet, look closely at our lives. We live in an age of unprecedented information. We know more about the universe than any generation before us. We can explain the birth of stars, the structure of DNA, the chemistry of emotion. We can simulate entire worlds on screens no larger than our hands. And still, beneath all this knowing, there is a quiet panic we cannot explain away. We know more, but we are not calmer. We understand more, but we are not freer. We explain more, but we still suffer. Buddhism notices this contradiction and dares to ask a dangerous question. What if some answers do not liberate us but trap us? The Buddha once compared speculative metaphysical questions to a man struck by a poisoned arrow. The man refuses treatment unless he knows who shot the arrow, where the arrow came from, what kind of wood it was made of, and what feathers were used. While he waits for answers, the poison spreads through his body. The point is not that questions are wrong. The point is timing and relevance. Suffering is urgent. Liberation is urgent. And any question that distracts us from addressing suffering directly becomes part of the problem, no matter how intelligent or fascinating it sounds. This teaching cuts against something very deep in us, the belief that understanding our past will save us. That if we trace our pain far enough back to childhood, to ancestry, to evolution, to the beginning of time, we will finally be released from it. But Buddhism offers a quieter, more unsettling truth. Knowing how suffering began does not end suffering. Seeing how suffering is happening right now does. This is why Buddhism refuses to answer certain questions not out of ignorance, but out of compassion. Because the mind is incredibly skilled at using questions as a form of escape. We chase explanations the way we chase distractions. We tell ourselves we are seeking truth, but often we are avoiding intimacy with our own experience. We stay in our heads because it feels safer than staying with our feelings. Think about how often we replay the past or rehearse the future. How rarely we actually inhabit the present moment without narrating it, fixing it, or judging it. Even our deepest questions are often strategies for distance. Where do humans come from? Why am I the way I am? What is the meaning of all this? These questions feel profound, but they can also become shields, ways of postponing the raw encounter with what is happening inside us right now. The Buddha saw this clearly. He understood that the mind will travel anywhere except here. So instead of feeding that habit, Buddhism interrupts it. It says stop, look, feel, notice, not tomorrow. Not after you understand the universe, now. This refusal to indulge speculative curiosity can feel frustrating, especially to a culture that prizes intellectual mastery. But there is something deeply honest in it. Buddhism is not interested in building beautiful theories if those theories leave us just as anxious, just as reactive, just as lost as before. It is interested in one thing: the end of suffering. And suffering, Buddhism insists, is not rooted in the unknown origins of the cosmos. It is rooted in how we relate to experience, how we cling, how we resist, how we misinterpret impermanence as a personal threat. We suffer not because we don't know where we came from, but because we demand that life be stable in a world that is constantly changing. This insight shifts everything. Instead of asking, what created me? Buddhism asks, what am I doing right now that creates tension, fear, or dissatisfaction? Instead of pointing backward toward a mythical beginning, it points inward toward habit, toward craving, toward the subtle movements of the mind that turn neutral experience into suffering. This is why Buddhist wisdom feels so practical. It does not float above life, it moves directly into it. Into traffic, into relationships, into disappointment, into success that fails to satisfy, into moments when everything is fine on the outside, but something inside still feels restless. The Buddha understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to articulate, that the mind's obsession with explanation is often a form of control seeking. We want answers not because we love truth, but because we fear uncertainty. And uncertainty is unavoidable. No explanation, no matter how elegant, can guarantee safety. No theory can protect us from loss. No origin story can spare us from aging, illness, or death. Buddhism does not deny this reality. It faces it directly, without anesthesia. But instead of despair, it offers something radical: peace that does not depend on certainty. This peace does not come from knowing everything. It comes from learning how to stay present with not knowing, from discovering that uncertainty itself is not the enemy, resistance to uncertainty is. In this sense, Buddhism is not anti-intellectual. It is anti-distraction. It distinguishes between wisdom that frees and knowledge that merely entertains or reassures the ego. And this distinction matters deeply in modern life. We live surrounded by endless commentary, endless opinions, endless interpretations of reality. There is always another explanation available, another framework, another lens. And yet, the more perspectives we collect, the harder it becomes to touch anything directly. Buddhism strips all of this away and asks something disarmingly simple. What is happening right now in your body, in your mind, in this moment? Are you tense? Are you grasping? Are you resisting? Are you lost in thought? This is where suffering is born. Not in the distant past. Not in the stars. Not in some cosmic event beyond our reach. But here quietly, habitually, repeatedly. By refusing to answer speculative questions, Buddhism forces us to confront this uncomfortable truth. It removes the escape routes. It takes away the illusion that liberation lies somewhere else, at some other time, after we figure everything out. And this can feel threatening. Because if the problem is not out there, then the responsibility is not out there either. If suffering is created moment by moment through misunderstanding, then freedom must also be cultivated moment by moment through awareness. This is where Buddhism becomes deeply empowering and deeply demanding. It does not offer salvation through belief. It offers liberation through seeing. And seeing requires courage. It requires honesty. It requires us to sit with discomfort instead of immediately numbing it with explanation. This is why the Buddha's refusal to answer certain questions is not a rejection of seekers. It is an invitation to a deeper kind of seeking, one that does not chase ideas, but investigates experience. A seeking that does not accumulate answers, but sheds illusions. In this light, the question, "Where do humans come from?" begins to soften. It loses its sharp edge. It stops demanding an answer and starts revealing an assumption that if we knew our origin, we would finally feel whole. Buddhism gently dismantles that assumption. Wholeness does not come from knowing the beginning of the story. It comes from being fully present in the middle of it. And perhaps this is the most radical message of all. That liberation is not hidden in the past, nor waiting in the future. It is available now, but only if we stop running from this moment in search of explanations that promise safety but deliver distance. The Buddha refused to answer because he saw what we often miss, that the mind's hunger for answers can become just another form of craving. And craving, no matter how intellectual it appears, binds us to dissatisfaction. So Buddhism does not hand us certainty. It hands us a mirror. And in that mirror, we are invited to see not where we came from, but how we are living. Because that is the question that changes everything. There is a quiet discomfort that arises when we try to imagine a beginning. Not an intellectual discomfort, but something deeper, almost emotional. We are taught from an early age to think in starting points. Birthdays, origins, founding dates. Day 1. Chapter 1. We organize our lives around beginnings because beginnings give us orientation. They tell us where we are in the story. They reassure us that progress is possible, that endings are meaningful, that time is moving in a direction we can understand. And yet, when Buddhism speaks about time, it gently removes that anchor. According to the Buddhist view, there is no first morning, no cosmic sunrise where everything suddenly came into being. No opening scene where the universe took its first breath. Time, as Buddhism sees it, does not begin, it flows. It does not move toward a final destination, it turns, expands, dissolves, and reforms endlessly. At first, this idea feels abstract, philosophical, almost poetic. But if we sit with it long enough, it begins to touch something raw inside us. Because if there was no beginning, then there is no original moment to return to. No pure state to reclaim by going backward. No golden age buried somewhere in the past, waiting to be rediscovered. And that challenges one of our deepest assumptions, that healing comes from tracing things back far enough. In my view, this is one of the most liberating and unsettling teachings Buddhism offers. We live in a culture obsessed with origins. We trace our pain back to childhood. We search our family history for explanations. We analyze generations of trauma, identity, and circumstance. There is value in this work, real value. But I believe we often overestimate how much the past can save us. Because even when we understand where something came from, it doesn't automatically release its grip. Buddhism seems to understand this at a profound level. By describing time as beginningless, it removes the illusion that salvation lies in the past. It tells us, quietly but firmly, that there is no first cause we can uncover that will suddenly make life make sense. And strangely, this is not depressing. It is relieving. If time has no beginning, then we are not late. We are not behind. We are not failing to live up to some imagined starting point where everyone else got it right. We are simply here participating in a vast, ongoing process that did not start with us and will not end with us. This perspective invites humility. But it also invites compassion. Buddhist texts speak of unimaginably long cycles of existence, kalpas, time spans so vast that the human mind cannot grasp them. To describe them, the Buddha used metaphors rather than numbers. A mountain slowly worn down by a silk cloth, brushing against it once every 100 years. The implication is clear: whatever we think is permanent is not. Whatever we think is urgent is likely temporary. Whatever we think defines us is part of a much larger movement. I find this teaching deeply grounding, especially in a society that constantly pressures us to rush. We rush to define ourselves. We rush to succeed. We rush to heal. We rush to become better versions of who we are. And beneath all this urgency lies an unspoken fear that time is running out. But Buddhism, with its vision of beginningless time, whispers something radically different. Time is not chasing you. You are not in competition with existence. There is no cosmic deadline you are failing to meet. This doesn't mean time doesn't matter. It means time doesn't threaten. From this view, anxiety takes on a different shape. So much of our anxiety comes from the belief that if we don't figure things out quickly enough, something essential will be lost forever. That if we don't resolve our questions soon, we will miss our chance at meaning. But if existence itself has no beginning, then meaning does not depend on timing. It depends on awareness. This is a lesson I find especially relevant in modern American life, where the pace of everything accelerates faster than our ability to stay present. We are constantly reminded of what we haven't achieved yet, what phase of life we should be in, what milestones we should have passed by now. And without realizing it, we internalize time as a judge. Buddhism removes the judge. It replaces the timeline with a rhythm of arising and passing, of formation and dissolution, of experience appearing, changing, and fading away. Not as a failure, not as a tragedy, but as the nature of reality itself. When you truly take this in, something shifts. You begin to see that the pressure to get it right is self-imposed, that the belief in a correct pace for life is an invention. That much of our suffering comes from measuring ourselves against imagined clocks. From the Buddhist view, the universe itself does not rush. Worlds arise over inconceivable spans of time, endure for equally vast periods, and dissolve without regret. Nothing clings to its own existence. Nothing mourns its own impermanence. And here is where the teaching becomes deeply personal. If the universe can arise and pass without panic, why can't we? If stars are born and die without identity crises, why do we cling so tightly to who we think we are? The Buddhist answer is not condemnation. It is understanding. We cling because we forget. We forget that impermanence is not a threat, it is a guarantee of renewal. We forget that change is not a sign of failure, it is the only reason growth is possible at all. Beginningless time reframes suffering in a profound way. It suggests that pain is not evidence that something has gone wrong in the story of existence. It is evidence that we are resisting a process much larger than ourselves. And here is a personal conviction I want to emphasize. Many people are not suffering because life is too hard. They are suffering because they believe life should be more stable than it ever was meant to be. We expect permanence in relationships, certainty in identity, security in circumstances. And when reality inevitably disrupts these expectations, we interpret the disruption as a personal betrayal. But Buddhism invites us to see disruption as normal. In a universe without a first morning, instability is not an exception, it is the rule. This doesn't mean we should become passive or detached from life. On the contrary, it invites a deeper engagement. When we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we become more present with what it actually offers. Moments become precious not because they last, but because they don't. Love becomes meaningful not because it is guaranteed, but because it is fragile. Life becomes sacred, not because it is eternal, but because it is fleeting. And here is where the teaching of beginningless time quietly transforms the question of human origin. If there was no first moment, then our existence is not a problem to be solved. It is an experience to be understood. We are not here to trace ourselves back to some mythical starting point. We are here to learn how to live wisely within constant change. This understanding has practical consequences. It softens our relationship with regret. If time has no beginning, then no single mistake defines us. It softens our fear of aging. If cycles are endless, then aging is not decline, it is participation. It softens our grief. If nothing truly begins or ends in isolation, then loss is not erasure, it is transformation. I believe this is one of Buddhism's greatest gifts to the modern world, the ability to hold impermanence without despair. In a culture that often treats change as a threat to identity, Buddhism treats change as the foundation of freedom. Because only what changes can be released. Only what is not fixed can be understood. When we stop asking where time began, we begin to ask a more intimate question. How am I relating to change right now? Am I resisting it? Am I fearing it? Am I trying to outrun it? Or am I learning how to move with it? Beginningless time does not make us insignificant. It places us exactly where we need to be, in the middle of a vast, unfolding reality that does not demand perfection, only awareness. And perhaps this is the most important lesson of all. If there was no first morning, then this moment is not late. It is not behind. It is not a mistake. It is simply the next appearance in an endless flow of conditions, and it is enough. From this view, the human story does not need a dramatic beginning to be meaningful. Its meaning comes from how we meet what is happening now, with fear or with curiosity, with resistance or with openness, with grasping or with grace. And once we truly understand that, time stops being an enemy. It becomes a teacher. There is something both humbling and unsettling about realizing that the universe has risen and collapsed more times than we could ever count, and that it did so without noticing us. According to Buddhism, worlds are not born once and preserved forever. They arise, endure, dissolve, and disappear, only to arise again under new conditions. Expansion follows contraction. Form follows emptiness. Emptiness gives way to form. This is not myth in the sense of fantasy. It is myth in the sense of meaning, a symbolic language pointing toward a truth that logic alone cannot carry. When I first encountered this teaching, it didn't inspire awe. It inspired resistance. Because if worlds are born and destroyed endlessly, then there is no ultimate guarantee that this world, my world, matters in the way I want it to. No cosmic assurance that my plans, my struggles, my identity sit at the center of anything permanent. But the more I sat with this view, the more I realized how honest it is. We live as though stability is the natural state of things. We expect relationships to remain intact, careers to progress predictably, bodies to cooperate, societies to hold together. And when they don't, when something collapses, we experience it as personal failure or cosmic injustice. We ask, why is this happening to me? As if collapse were an anomaly rather than a pattern. Buddhism turns this assumption upside down. In the Buddhist view, collapse is not an interruption of order. It is the order. Worlds come into being not because a divine will decides to create them, but because conditions align. When the conditions shift, the world shifts. When the conditions dissolve, the world dissolves. Nothing is punished. Nothing is rewarded. Nothing is singled out. This process unfolds with complete indifference to our preferences and complete consistency with its own nature. I believe this is one of the hardest truths for the modern mind to accept. We want meaning to be personal. We want the universe to care in a way that mirrors our emotional needs. We want reassurance that things happen for us. Buddhism does not offer that comfort. What it offers instead is something quieter and, in the long run, more liberating: understanding without favoritism. In the ancient texts, the Buddha describes vast cosmic cycles where entire world systems dissolve, beings are reborn in subtler realms, and eventually new worlds take shape again. Fire, water, wind, and space reorganize. Matter condenses. Forms reappear. Life resumes not as a continuation of the old story, but as the unfolding of new conditions shaped by the momentum of what came before. There is no creator orchestrating this process. No final authority overseeing outcomes. Just cause and effect moving on a scale so large. It makes human timelines feel almost irrelevant. And yet this is the part that always stops me: human experience still matters. Not because it is permanent, but because it is conscious. In my opinion, this is where Buddhist cosmology becomes deeply ethical rather than merely cosmic. The rise and fall of worlds is not presented as a spectacle to admire. It is presented as a context within which responsibility becomes unavoidable. Because while we do not control the universe, we do participate in the conditions that shape experience moment by moment, intention by intention. The universe may not revolve around us, but our actions ripple outward in ways we do not fully see. This teaching challenges one of our most comforting illusions, that meaning requires permanence. We often assume that if something doesn't last, it doesn't count. If a relationship ends, we question whether it was ever real. If a career changes, we doubt the value of what came before. If a phase of life dissolves, we grieve not only its loss, but its perceived failure. Buddhism offers a radically different interpretation. It suggests that impermanence does not erase meaning, it creates it. A world that never collapsed would be static. A life that never changed would be mechanical. Growth requires breakdown. Renewal requires dissolution. The very fact that worlds rise and fall is what allows new expressions of life to appear. I want to emphasize this clearly, because it has real consequences for how we live. Collapse is not the opposite of creation. It is part of creation. We see this everywhere when we're willing to look honestly. Forests burn so new growth can emerge. Cells die so bodies can function. Old identities break down so more authentic ones can take their place. Yet when this same process happens in our personal lives, we panic. We cling. We resist. We try to preserve forms that no longer match the conditions sustaining them. And this resistance is where suffering intensifies. From the Buddhist perspective, suffering does not arise because things fall apart. It arises because we demand that they don't. When we zoom out to the scale of cosmic cycles, this demand begins to look strange. How can we expect permanence in a universe defined by transformation? How can we ask life to freeze when its very nature is movement? This is not a call to nihilism. It is a call to maturity. There is a quiet strength that comes from accepting that nothing, not even worlds, is guaranteed to last. That strength does not make us indifferent. It makes us present. When we stop expecting permanence, we stop postponing presence. We stop living as though meaning will arrive later, once everything stabilizes. Because stability, Buddhism reminds us, is always temporary. I've come to believe that much of modern anxiety is rooted in a subtle refusal to accept this truth. We build our lives as though the current arrangement is supposed to hold forever. And when reality disagrees, we experience the disagreement as trauma rather than as information. The Buddhist view of cosmic cycles reframes trauma itself. It suggests that disruption is not always a sign of damage, it is often a signal of transition. A movement from one configuration of conditions to another. This doesn't make pain disappear, but it does make pain intelligible. When you understand that even worlds dissolve, you begin to see your own upheavals differently. A broken relationship is no longer evidence that love failed. A career ending is no longer proof that effort was wasted. A period of confusion is no longer a detour from life, it is life, reorganizing itself. This perspective does not remove grief. It gives grief context, and context matters. Without context, suffering feels random and personal. With context, it becomes part of a larger pattern, still painful, but no longer isolating. We are no longer alone in our collapse. We are participating in a universal rhythm that has been unfolding long before us and will continue long after. One of the most powerful implications of Buddhist cosmology is that it removes the fantasy of a perfect, unchanging world. There is no ideal state we are meant to reach and then preserve. There is only responsiveness, our capacity to meet change with wisdom rather than fear. In practical terms, this means learning how to let go without losing heart. It means allowing forms to dissolve without assuming that everything dissolving is wrong. It means understanding that control is always partial, and that clinging to control creates more suffering than the chaos we are trying to avoid. I believe this is a message our time desperately needs. We live in an era of constant disruption, technological, social, environmental. And our instinctive response is to tighten our grip, to retreat into certainty, to demand guarantees. But Buddhism offers another possibility, to deepen our adaptability instead of our defenses. When worlds rise and fall, the only thing that carries forward is momentum, habit, intention, tendency. In Buddhist language, this is karma. Not fate, not punishment, but the natural continuation of patterns. This is where the cosmic and the personal meet. We may not control the birth and death of worlds, but we do shape the quality of experience that unfolds within them. Our intentions matter. Our actions matter. How we respond to change matters. And this, to me, is profoundly empowering. It means that even in a universe that offers no permanent ground, we are not helpless. We are participants, not rulers, not victims. Participants in a vast process that responds to how we show up. The rise and fall of worlds teaches us humility. It also teaches us responsibility. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is guaranteed. And precisely because of that, every moment carries weight. If this world were eternal, our actions would lose urgency. If life were static, our choices would lose significance. It is because things change, because worlds dissolve, that presence becomes precious. So when Buddhism speaks of cosmic cycles, it is not inviting us to escape into abstraction. It is inviting us to live more honestly here. To stop pretending that stability is the default. To stop postponing meaning until conditions improve. To stop demanding that life protect us from loss. Instead, it invites us to develop the one capacity that survives every collapse: awareness. Awareness does not stop worlds from ending. It allows us to meet endings without losing ourselves. It allows us to grieve without drowning, to rebuild without clinging, to participate fully even when nothing lasts. In a universe where worlds are born and destroyed without ceremony, meaning does not come from permanence. It comes from how consciously we engage with impermanence. And that, I believe, is one of the most honest and compassionate teachings ever offered to the human heart. There is a moment in the Buddhist story of human origins that feels less like cosmology and more like a confession about the human condition. It is the moment when consciousness, once light and unburdened, begins to take shape, not abruptly, not violently, but slowly, almost tenderly, through attention, curiosity, and desire. According to Buddhist thought, existence did not begin with bodies. It began with awareness. Before weight, before form, before hunger, there was experience without friction. Consciousness existed without sharp edges, without the heaviness of identity, without the constant negotiation between what is wanted and what is feared. It was luminous, not in a supernatural sense, but in the sense of being unobstructed. I've come to believe that much of modern anxiety is rooted in a subtle refusal to accept this truth. We build our lives as though the current arrangement is supposed to hold forever. And when reality disagrees, we experience the disagreement as trauma rather than as information. The Buddhist view of cosmic cycles reframes trauma itself. It suggests that disruption is not always a sign of damage. It is often a signal of transition, a movement from one configuration of conditions to another. This doesn't make pain disappear, but it does make pain intelligible. When you understand that even worlds dissolve, you begin to see your own upheavals differently. A broken relationship is no longer evidence that love failed. A career ending is no longer proof that effort was wasted. A period of confusion is no longer a detour from life, it is life reorganizing itself. This perspective does not remove grief. It gives grief context, and context matters. Without context, suffering feels random and personal. With context, it becomes part of a larger pattern, still painful, but no longer isolating. We are no longer alone in our collapse. We are participating in a universal rhythm that has been unfolding long before us, and will continue long after. One of the most powerful implications of Buddhist cosmology is that it removes the fantasy of a perfect, unchanging world. There is no ideal state we are meant to reach and then preserve. There is only responsiveness, our capacity to meet change with wisdom rather than fear. In practical terms, this means learning how to let go without losing heart. It means allowing forms to dissolve without assuming that everything dissolving is wrong. It means understanding that control is always partial, and that clinging to control creates more suffering than the chaos we are trying to avoid. I believe this is a message our time desperately needs. We live in an era of constant disruption, technological, social, environmental. And our instinctive response is to tighten our grip, to retreat into certainty, to demand guarantees. But Buddhism offers another possibility: to deepen our adaptability instead of our defenses. When worlds rise and fall, the only thing that carries forward is momentum, habit, intention, tendency. In Buddhist language, this is karma. Not fate, not punishment, but the natural continuation of patterns. This is where the cosmic and the personal meet. We may not control the birth and death of worlds, but we do shape the quality of experience that unfolds within them. Our intentions matter. Our actions matter. How we respond to change matters. And this, to me, is profoundly empowering. It means that, even in a universe that offers no permanent ground, we are not helpless. We are participants. Not rulers. Not victims. Participants in a vast process that responds to how we show up. The rise and fall of worlds teaches us humility. It also teaches us responsibility. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is guaranteed. And precisely because of that, every moment carries weight. If this world were eternal, our actions would lose urgency. If life were static, our choices would lose significance. It is because things change, because worlds dissolve, that presence becomes precious. So when Buddhism speaks of cosmic cycles, it is not inviting us to escape into abstraction. It is inviting us to live more honestly here, to stop pretending that stability is the default, to stop postponing meaning until conditions improve, to stop demanding that life protect us from loss. Instead, it invites us to develop the one capacity that survives every collapse: awareness. Awareness does not stop worlds from ending. It allows us to meet endings without losing ourselves. It allows us to grieve without drowning, to rebuild without clinging, to participate fully, even when nothing lasts. In a universe where worlds are born and destroyed without ceremony, meaning does not come from permanence. It comes from how consciously we engage with impermanence. And that, I believe, is one of the most honest and compassionate teachings ever offered to the human heart. There is a moment in the Buddhist story of human origins that feels less like cosmology and more like a confession about the human condition. It is the moment when consciousness, once light and unburdened, begins to take shape, not abruptly, not violently, but slowly, almost tenderly, through attention, curiosity, and desire. According to Buddhist thought, existence did not begin with bodies. It began with awareness. Before weight, before form, before hunger, there was experience without friction. Consciousness existed without sharp edges, without the heaviness of identity, without the constant negotiation between what is wanted and what is feared. It was luminous, not in a supernatural sense, but in the sense of being unobstructed. I want to pause here, because this idea is often misunderstood. When Buddhism speaks of luminous, mind-made beings, it is not asking us to believe in a literal fairy tale past. It is pointing to a psychological truth that is still accessible now. There is a way of experiencing life that is lighter, clearer, less contracted. And most of us have touched it, even if briefly. You see it in moments of deep presence, when time seems to soften, when attention is whole, when the mind is not divided against itself. It happens in nature, sometimes, standing quietly, as the sun rises over an empty landscape. It happens in moments of genuine connection, when self-consciousness fades and experience flows without commentary. It even happens unexpectedly, in ordinary moments, when we stop trying to become someone and simply are. These moments feel different because consciousness is not yet burdened by identity. In my opinion, this is what the Buddhist story of early consciousness is really describing, not a historical era, but a mode of being, a way of knowing the world before the mind learned to grasp it. But consciousness does not remain abstract. It moves. It explores. It encounters sensation. And here, Buddhism introduces a crucial turning point, not as a moral failure, but as a natural development. Consciousness becomes curious. This curiosity is not wrong. It is not sinful. It is the seed of learning, creativity, and engagement. But curiosity without awareness has consequences. When consciousness begins to taste experience without understanding impermanence, attachment quietly takes root. The ancient texts describe beings drawn toward an earthly essence, something rich, appealing, and pleasurable. Again, this is not meant to be read literally. It is a metaphor for the moment when experience becomes something we want to possess rather than simply encounter. This is the birth of craving. And craving, I believe, is one of the most misunderstood forces in human life. We tend to think of craving as desire for excess money, pleasure, power. But craving begins much earlier and much more subtly. It begins the moment we decide that a particular experience should last longer than it naturally does. It begins when we say, silently, I want more of this, or I don't want this to end. In that moment, consciousness starts to contract. The Buddhist story tells us that as beings consumed this essence, their luminosity faded. They became heavier. Differentiation emerged. Comparison appeared. Identity began to form. This is not a punishment, it is a process. And this process is happening now. Every time we grasp at an experience, consciousness takes on weight. Every time we cling to an identity, the mind solidifies. Every time we define ourselves too narrowly, awareness loses its flexibility. This is why identity can feel both comforting and suffocating. We want to know who we are. We want to belong somewhere. We want stable reference points. But the more tightly we cling to these definitions, the less freely consciousness moves. The lighter it once felt becomes dense. What was once fluid becomes rigid. I want to be clear about something here, because it matters deeply. Buddhism is not anti-identity. It does not ask us to erase our personalities or deny our humanity. What it challenges is the unconscious attachment to identity, the belief that who we are must be fixed in order for us to be safe. This belief is one of the main sources of suffering in modern life. We say things like, "This is just who I am," as if identity were a finished product rather than an ongoing process. We defend our self-image even when it causes pain. We protect roles that no longer fit. And when life threatens these identities, we experience fear that feels existential. But from the Buddhist perspective, this fear is not proof that something precious is being taken away. It is evidence that consciousness has become entangled with form. When awareness forgets its own fluid nature, it begins to mistake temporary configurations for permanent truth. It believes it must hold on in order to exist. And this belief creates tension at the core of experience. This is why, in my view, the Buddhist account of consciousness taking shape is not about ancient beings becoming human. It is about awareness becoming self-conscious. Self-consciousness is not inherently bad. It allows reflection, morality, and self-understanding. But when it dominates experience, it creates separation. We stop living and start managing ourselves. We monitor how we appear. We evaluate our worth. We compare our progress. We narrate our lives instead of inhabiting them. And slowly, without realizing it, we trade immediacy for control. The story tells us that as consciousness took shape, distinctions emerged. Differences became noticeable. Some were admired. Others were judged. Comparison entered the mind. And with comparison came pride and shame, the twin forces that drive so much of human behavior. This is one of the most accurate psychological observations ever made. Comparison is not a modern invention. It is not a social media problem. It is a structural feature of identity-based consciousness. The moment we define ourselves, we begin to measure ourselves. The moment we measure ourselves, we become vulnerable to dissatisfaction. In my experience, many people are not unhappy because their lives are bad. They are unhappy because they are constantly comparing their inner reality to someone else's outer appearance, or their present moment to an imagined ideal. And comparison always has a cost. It turns life into a performance. It turns growth into competition. It turns uniqueness into hierarchy. The Buddhist story suggests that this is the price of consciousness taking form without wisdom. As awareness becomes entangled with sensation and identity, it begins to experience hunger, not just physical hunger, but psychological hunger. A hunger to be seen, to be affirmed, to be secure, to be more than what it is right now. This hunger is exhausting, and yet it is so normalized that we rarely question it. We build entire lives around managing this hunger. We chase achievements to quiet it. We collect relationships to soothe it. We distract ourselves endlessly to avoid feeling it. But no matter how much we feed it, it never feels full. Why? Because it is not asking for more experience. It is asking for understanding. The Buddha's insight here is subtle but powerful. Craving is not solved by satisfaction. It is dissolved by awareness. The problem is not that we want too much. The problem is that we don't see clearly how wanting works. When consciousness first encountered form, it did not understand impermanence. It did not see that pleasure fades, that sensation changes, that holding on intensifies suffering. And so it grasped. And in grasping, it lost its lightness. This is not a story of sin. It is a story of innocence. And this matters, because how we interpret our condition shapes how we try to heal it. If we believe we are broken, we seek fixing. If we believe we are sinful, we seek redemption. But Buddhism suggests something gentler: we are simply confused. And confusion can be clarified. I want to emphasize this strongly. You are not suffering because you are flawed. You are suffering because consciousness, by its nature, learned to cling before it learned to understand. This reframes self-compassion entirely. Instead of fighting ourselves, we can begin observing ourselves. Instead of condemning desire, we can study it. Instead of suppressing identity, we can hold it more lightly. The Buddhist path does not ask us to return to some imagined state of purity. It asks us to develop wisdom within form, to live fully in the world without being trapped by it. When consciousness took shape, the story says, it did not lose its potential, it gained complexity. And complexity brings both suffering and possibility. The same self-awareness that creates anxiety also makes liberation possible. Because only a conscious being can wake up. Only a being who feels the weight of identity can learn how to release it. Only a mind that experiences craving can learn non-attachment. Only a heart that knows dissatisfaction can recognize peace. This is why human existence is so precious in Buddhism, not because it is superior, but because it sits at a unique intersection. We are aware enough to suffer deeply, and aware enough to understand that suffering. And here is my personal conviction. Stated plainly, the goal is not to escape form, but to inhabit it wisely. Too often, spiritual teachings are misunderstood as invitations to transcend life. Buddhism is not about transcending life, it is about understanding it so deeply that clinging becomes unnecessary. Consciousness took shape, and with it came weight. But that weight is not a burden to be rejected. It is a signal, a reminder, a call to awareness. Every time you feel contracted, anxious, or dissatisfied, something important is happening. Consciousness is noticing its own limits, and in that noticing lies the possibility of release. You do not need to go back to a mythical beginning to find freedom. You need to understand what is happening now, in this body, in this mind, in this moment of experience. The light that once seemed lost was never destroyed. It was simply obscured by grasping, and anything that can be obscured can be revealed. This is the quiet promise, hidden in the Buddhist story of origins, that no matter how heavy consciousness feels, awareness remains possible. That no matter how solid identity seems, it is still made of conditions. That no matter how long we have been lost in form, waking up is never out of reach. Because consciousness did not fall into the world. It learned how to meet it. And learning can always continue. There is a precise moment in the Buddhist story where something irreversible happens. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. There is no collapse of worlds or thunder in the sky. It is simply the moment when consciousness becomes heavy. Not heavy with pain at first, but heavy with attachment. This is the moment that explains almost everything about the human condition. According to the Buddhist account, once beings began to consume what was pleasurable. Once they learned to reach outward for satisfaction, something subtle shifted. The lightness of awareness dimmed. Differences appeared. Some forms were seen as more beautiful, more refined, more desirable than others. And the mind did something it had never done before: it compared. Comparison is where gravity enters consciousness. I want to say this clearly and personally, because I believe it deeply. Comparison is not a harmless habit. It is one of the most corrosive forces in human life. It turns existence into a hierarchy. It transforms uniqueness into competition. It quietly teaches the mind that worth must be measured rather than experienced. And once that belief takes root, the descent accelerates. The Buddhist story tells us that when beings began to notice differences, conceit arose. Pride in some, shame in others. Identity hardened around form. And with that hardening came suffering, not as punishment, but as consequence. This is not ancient mythology. This is a precise psychological diagnosis. Look around modern life. Look honestly. We are surrounded by abundance, yet haunted by inadequacy. We are more connected than ever, yet constantly measuring ourselves against curated versions of other lives. We do not simply experience reality anymore, we rank it. We do not simply live, we evaluate. And the more we evaluate, the heavier consciousness becomes. What strikes me most about this teaching is how gentle it is. Buddhism does not accuse humans of corruption. It does not frame this descent as a moral failure. It frames it as misunderstanding compounded by habit. Consciousness, encountering pleasure, did not know how to relate to it skillfully, so it grasped. Consciousness, encountering difference, did not know how to hold diversity without judgment, so it compared. Consciousness, encountering form, did not know it was temporary, so it clung. This is how weight is created. And here is my firm belief: most of what we call stress, anxiety, or burnout today is not caused by the events of life. It is caused by the constant internal pressure of maintaining an identity in a world of comparison. We are tired not because we do too much, but because we carry too much. We carry stories about who we are supposed to be. We carry fear about falling behind. We carry shame about not being enough. We carry pride that demands constant reinforcement. And all of this weight sits on the mind, compressing awareness, narrowing perception. The Buddhist story says that as beings grew heavier, distinctions multiplied. Eventually, physical forms differentiated. Gender appeared. Roles emerged. Desire became more complex. The body became a site of craving and conflict. But the deeper transformation had already occurred. The real shift was not physical. It was psychological. Once the mind learned to compare, it learned to divide the world into me and not me, better and worse, success and failure. And from that division arose fear of loss, fear of inferiority, fear of insignificance. This fear is subtle, but it shapes nearly every decision we make. We choose careers not only out of interest, but out of comparison. We form relationships not only out of love, but out of validation. We pursue success not only for security, but to quiet an inner voice that asks, "Am I enough?" And here is the painful truth. No amount of achievement can silence that voice for long. Because comparison has no finish line. There is always someone doing better. Someone further ahead. Someone more admired. And even when we temporarily come out on top, the mind immediately scans for the next threat. Pride and insecurity feed each other endlessly. This is why Buddhism places such emphasis on understanding conceit, not as arrogance alone, but as the entire structure of self-comparison. Conceit says, "I am better than." Conceit says, "I am worse than." Conceit even says, "I am equal to." All three are traps, because all three require a fixed self to defend. When consciousness becomes heavy, it loses its ability to rest. It is always bracing, always adjusting, always scanning for threats to identity. Even pleasure becomes work, because pleasure must be protected, repeated, and displayed. I want to be honest here, this way of living is exhausting, and it is far more common than we admit. We live in a culture that normalizes self-criticism as motivation. That treats comparison as ambition. That confuses pressure with purpose. And then we wonder why peace feels so distant. The Buddhist story does not blame us for this. It simply shows us the mechanism. The moment consciousness began to identify with form, it began to fear impermanence. Because if I am this, then what happens when this changes? This is the root of heaviness. We are not afraid because life is uncertain. We are afraid because we have tied our sense of self to things that cannot remain stable. Bodies age. Careers shift. Relationships change. Reputation fades. When identity is built on these foundations, anxiety becomes logical. This is why, in my view, Buddhism's analysis of suffering is so compassionate. It does not ask us to eliminate desire or identity through force. It asks us to see clearly how clinging creates weight. Awareness lightens when it no longer needs to defend an image. One of the most profound shifts in my own understanding came when I realized that peace is not something we add to life, it is something that emerges when we stop carrying unnecessary burdens. And comparison is one of the heaviest burdens there is. When you stop comparing, something unexpected happens. Not immediately, not magically, but gradually. Experience becomes more direct. Joy becomes quieter but deeper. Pain becomes less personal. You stop narrating every moment as evidence of success or failure. Life becomes less about proving and more about participating. The Buddhist story describes how, as beings became heavier, the world itself changed. Resources became scarce. Greed arose. Hoarding began. Harmony broke down. This is not accidental. Inner contraction leads to outer conflict. When minds are heavy, societies fracture. I believe this is one of the most important lessons Buddhism offers the modern world. Collective suffering is not separate from individual psychology. Systems of inequality, exploitation, and violence are not random, they reflect aggregated patterns of fear, craving, and comparison. A world built on competition will always produce winners who are anxious and losers who are ashamed. But here is the hopeful part. The Buddhist story does not end with heaviness. It does not say that once consciousness becomes dense, liberation is impossible. It says the opposite. It suggests that heaviness itself becomes the teacher. Because weight is felt. When awareness is light, it does not question itself. When it becomes heavy, discomfort arises. Dissatisfaction appears. Suffering announces itself. This discomfort is not a mistake. It is a signal. It is consciousness noticing that something is wrong with how it is relating to experience. In other words, suffering is not the enemy of awakening. It is often the beginning of it. This is a crucial point, and I want to emphasize it strongly. If you feel dissatisfied, restless, or burdened, it does not mean you are failing at life. It means you are sensitive enough to notice misalignment. Many people numb this sensitivity. They drown it in distraction. They label it weakness. They suppress it with productivity or pleasure. But Buddhism invites us to listen to it instead. Heaviness is a message. It says you are carrying more than you need to. It says you have mistaken comparison for truth. It says you are clinging to forms that cannot hold what you are asking of them. And when this message is understood not intellectually, but experientially, something begins to loosen. The Buddhist path does not require us to reject the world. It requires us to stop measuring ourselves against it. When comparison drops away, compassion becomes possible. Not as a moral duty, but as a natural response. Because without hierarchy, there is no one to be above or below, only fellow participants in change. When pride softens, shame softens with it. When identity loosens, fear loosens. When fear loosens, awareness expands. This is how lightness returns, not by going backward, not by undoing form, but by seeing through the habits that made form feel like a prison. I am convinced that the most radical spiritual act in our time is not renunciation, it is non-comparison. To live without constantly ranking yourself. To work without tying worth to outcome. To love without using relationship as proof of value. To exist without needing to justify your place in the world. This is not passivity. It is freedom. The moment we became heavy was the moment we forgot this freedom. But forgetting is not permanent. Habits can be seen. Patterns can be interrupted. Awareness can learn to rest again. The Buddhist story reminds us that heaviness is not our essence. It is a condition. And conditions can change. The light was never destroyed. It was simply covered by layers of grasping. And anything that is layered can be uncovered slowly, patiently, honestly, by learning how to let go. When fear enters the human heart, society is born. Not society as an ideal, not as a vision of harmony or shared purpose, but society as a strategy, a response, a collective attempt to manage uncertainty, scarcity, and the quiet anxiety that arises when we no longer trust the world or ourselves to hold us safely. According to the Buddhist understanding, human society did not emerge because people suddenly discovered cooperation as a virtue. It emerged because life became harder, resources became limited, and fear became unavoidable. This distinction matters. It changes how we see power, ownership, rules, and even morality itself. When consciousness became heavy and comparison took root, harmony fractured. What was once freely available began to disappear. What had been shared effortlessly now required effort, planning, and protection. And with this shift came a new mental posture: guarding. Fear makes us guard. Fear makes us divide. Fear makes us draw lines where none existed before. This is the soil in which society grows. The Buddhist story tells us that when abundance faded, beings began to mark territory. They claimed land, resources, and food. Not out of cruelty, but out of uncertainty. The future no longer felt guaranteed. And when the future feels unstable, possession begins to feel like safety. I believe this insight is one of the most honest explanations of human systems ever offered. We often like to imagine that societies are built on ideals: justice, equality, progress. But if we look closely, most systems arise first from fear and only later wrap themselves in language of virtue. Laws are created because trust has limits. Governments are formed because cooperation breaks down. Hierarchies emerge because power concentrates where insecurity is greatest. This does not mean society is evil. It means society is human. Fear is not a moral failure. It is a natural response to perceived threat. But when fear becomes the primary organizing principle of collective life, something subtle and dangerous happens. We begin to mistake control for care. In the Buddhist account, disputes arose when ownership appeared. Boundaries led to conflict. Conflict led to the need for authority. And so a leader was chosen, not because this leader was enlightened, but because order felt preferable to chaos. This moment is crucial. The first ruler in the Buddhist story is not divine. He is elected, chosen by consensus. His legitimacy comes not from wisdom, but from necessity. He exists to reduce harm, to mediate disputes, to restore a sense of stability. This is a profoundly realistic view of power. Power is not sacred. It is functional. And this is where I want to state my personal view clearly. Many of our struggles with authority today come from forgetting this simple truth. We expect systems built on fear to deliver peace. We expect structures designed for control to produce freedom. And when they fail, we either become cynical or we double down, demanding more control. But control cannot heal fear. It can only manage its symptoms. The Buddhist story does not condemn the formation of society. It simply refuses to romanticize it. It shows us that social structures arise as coping mechanisms for deeper psychological conditions. And unless those conditions are addressed, no amount of organization will bring lasting peace. This insight cuts deeply into modern life. We live in an age of unprecedented organization. Schedules, systems, algorithms, regulations, every aspect of life is managed, optimized, and monitored. And yet, beneath this efficiency, anxiety persists. Loneliness grows. Polarization intensifies. Why? Because systems can coordinate behavior, but they cannot resolve the inner roots of fear. Buddhism understood this long before sociology existed. It saw that society is a mirror. It reflects the collective state of mind. When minds are contracted, societies become rigid. When minds are fearful, societies become defensive. When minds are driven by craving, societies become competitive. And here is the uncomfortable truth: no political system can compensate for a lack of inner clarity. We often look outward for solutions to problems that are fundamentally psychological. We argue over policies while ignoring perception. We fight over structures while leaving fear untouched. And as long as fear remains unexamined, it will simply reorganize itself into new forms. The Buddhist story shows how roles emerged: farmers, leaders, workers, protectors. Division of labor allowed survival. But it also introduced hierarchy. And hierarchy, once established, tends to justify itself. Power accumulates. Privilege normalizes. Inequality solidifies. This is not because humans are inherently corrupt. It is because fear, when institutionalized, becomes self-perpetuating. Fear says protect what you have. Fear says secure your position. Fear says trust less, control more. And once these principles shape a society, compassion becomes conditional. It is offered selectively, often strategically. I believe this is why so many people feel alienated within systems that are supposed to serve them. The systems were not built to nurture wholeness. They were built to prevent collapse. And preventing collapse is not the same as fostering well-being. The Buddhist view invites us to see society honestly, without despair and without illusion. It does not ask us to dismantle social structures overnight. It asks us to understand their origin. Because when you understand where something comes from, you stop asking it to be what it was never designed to be. Society cannot give us ultimate security. It can only reduce immediate harm. Expecting more than that sets us up for disappointment. This does not mean withdrawing from civic life. It means engaging with it wisely. When we understand that society was born from fear, we stop looking to it for identity. We stop asking it to validate our worth. We stop expecting it to provide meaning. And this is incredibly freeing. Too many people tie their sense of self to roles defined by social structures, job titles, status, income, influence. And when these roles shift or disappear, identity collapses. But Buddhism reminds us roles are tools, not truths. They are ways of organizing activity, not definitions of who we are. This distinction is vital. When we confuse role with identity, we become trapped. We defend positions rather than values. We cling to status rather than integrity. And fear tightens its grip. The Buddhist path offers a different orientation. It encourages participation without attachment, responsibility without identification, engagement without self-loss. This is not detachment in the sense of indifference. It is detachment in the sense of clarity. You can care deeply without clinging. You can serve without self-erasure. You can lead without believing you are superior. These are not abstract ideals. They are practical necessities in a world shaped by fear. I want to emphasize something that feels especially important today. Society cannot evolve beyond the level of awareness of its members. We talk about systemic change as if it can occur independently of inner change. But systems are made of people, and people act from perception. If perception remains distorted by fear and comparison, the system will simply recreate the same patterns under new names. This is why Buddhism places such emphasis on individual awakening, not as a private escape, but as a social responsibility. A mind that is less fearful contributes to a society that is less reactive. A mind that is less attached to status contributes to a culture that is less hierarchical. A mind that understands impermanence contributes to institutions that are more humane. Change does not begin in policy. It begins in perception. This does not mean we ignore injustice. It means we address it at the root. Fear-based societies inevitably produce exclusion. They draw lines between us and them. They justify harm in the name of protection. And once this logic takes hold, cruelty can feel reasonable. Buddhism sees this clearly. It does not excuse harm, but it explains it. And explanation is not the same as justification. Understanding the roots of violence does not mean tolerating it. It means addressing it where it actually begins. In the heart. The Buddhist story ends this phase not with despair, but with an opening. As society becomes more complex, suffering becomes more visible. Conflict increases. Dissatisfaction spreads. And eventually, beings begin to question the very structures they created. This questioning is the seed of ethics. Not ethics imposed from above, but ethics arising from insight. From seeing that greed creates conflict. That hoarding breeds resentment. That domination fractures trust. This is where morality begins not as a rule book, but as a response to suffering. And here is my strongest conviction: true morality cannot be enforced. It must be understood. Rules can restrain behavior. They cannot transform motivation. Only awareness can do that. Society was born from fear, but it does not have to remain ruled by it. Each time an individual sees through fear, sees how it operates, how it distorts perception, how it drives harm, something shifts. The grip loosens. Compassion becomes possible, not as sentiment, but as clarity. Compassion arises when we see that others are not enemies, but fellow participants in fear-driven systems. This does not mean passivity. It means wisdom. To live wisely in society is to remember why society exists: to reduce suffering, not to define worth. And when we forget this, society hardens. When we remember it, society softens. The Buddhist path does not reject the world. It teaches us how to live within it without being consumed by its illusions. Society will always exist in some form. Fear will always arise under certain conditions. But awareness can transform how fear is met. And that transformation, quiet, gradual, deeply personal, is the beginning of a different kind of order. One not built on control, but on understanding. That, I believe, is the most radical possibility Buddhism offers the social world. There is a sentence in Buddhist teaching that should unsettle us far more than it usually does: to be born human is rare. Not rare in a poetic sense. Not rare as a compliment. Rare in the way a narrow opening is rare in a vast ocean. Rare in the way a single moment of clarity is rare in a lifetime of distraction. And yet, what makes this teaching truly uncomfortable is not the claim of rarity. It is the implication that follows. If human birth is rare, then it is not a reward. It is a responsibility. Buddhism does not flatter humanity. It does not place us at the center of the universe. In fact, it does the opposite. It situates human life in a vast field of existence, where countless forms arise and pass away. Many of those forms experience pleasure. Many experience suffering. But very few occupy the precise balance that humans do. This balance is what makes us dangerous. Not dangerous to others in a superficial sense, but dangerous in a deeper, existential one. Because humans possess something that most beings do not: the capacity to awaken. And with that capacity comes the equally strong capacity to waste it. In the Buddhist view, beings in realms of extreme suffering are too overwhelmed to reflect. Beings in realms of extreme pleasure are too distracted to question. Humans stand in between. We suffer enough to seek meaning, but not so much that seeking becomes impossible. We enjoy enough to glimpse joy, but not so much that we forget impermanence entirely. This middle position is unstable. It can tilt in either direction. And this is where the danger lies. I want to say something clearly, even if it sounds uncomfortable. Most human lives do not fulfill their potential. Not because people are lazy or immoral, but because they never realize what kind of opportunity they are holding. We are surrounded by urgency, yet blind to significance. We treat human life as ordinary simply because it is familiar. We assume tomorrow will come because it usually does. We postpone reflection because distraction is easier. And in doing so, we miss the very reason this form of existence is so rare. The Buddhist metaphor of the blind turtle surfacing once every 100 years, randomly encountering a floating ring in the vast ocean, is not meant to inspire gratitude alone. It is meant to provoke alarm, to shake us out of complacency, to make us ask, what am I doing with this chance? And here is my personal conviction, stated without hesitation. The greatest tragedy of human life is not suffering. It is unconsciousness. Suffering can awaken. Loss can clarify. Pain can deepen understanding. But unconsciousness numbs all of that. It turns even the most precious circumstances into background noise. We often think of danger as something external: violence, illness, disaster. Buddhism points to a quieter danger, the ability to live an entire human life without ever truly waking up. This is not a moral accusation. It is an observation. Humans are dangerous because we can create entire worlds, technological, social, psychological, without understanding our own minds. We can build systems faster than we can cultivate wisdom. We can amplify desire without examining craving. We can magnify power without grounding it in compassion. History is full of examples. So is modern life. But the danger is not only collective. It is deeply personal. To be human means to have just enough awareness to sense that something is off, and just enough distraction to avoid looking at it directly. This tension defines much of our inner life. We feel restless, but we don't know why. We feel dissatisfied, but we can't locate the source. So we assume the problem is external. More success, more stimulation, more affirmation, more control. And the cycle continues. Buddhism does not call this evil. It calls it ignorance, not as insult, but as condition. Ignorance simply means not seeing clearly. And what we fail to see is not some abstract truth about the universe, but the nature of our own experience. Human life is dangerous because it places us at a crossroads. We can turn toward awareness or deepen distraction. We can investigate suffering or anesthetize it. We can use our intelligence to liberate ourselves or to rationalize endless craving. And here is where the teaching becomes painfully honest. There is no guarantee we will choose well. Being human does not automatically lead to wisdom. It only makes wisdom possible. This is why Buddhism never assumes progress. It does not believe that time alone will save us. It does not believe that intelligence alone will enlighten us. It insists that without deliberate attention, the mind defaults to habit. And habit, when left unchecked, reinforces suffering. The rarity of human birth is not about cosmic privilege. It is about timing and capacity. This form of existence is uniquely suited for insight. The nervous system is sensitive enough. The cognitive faculties are developed enough. The emotional range is wide enough. The conditions are present. But conditions are not destiny. In my opinion, one of the most damaging myths of modern culture is the belief that self-awareness will emerge automatically. That if we just live long enough, experience enough, learn enough, clarity will arrive. It doesn't. Clarity must be cultivated. And cultivation requires intention. This is where many people quietly fail, not because they are incapable, but because no one ever told them that waking up is not accidental. It is a practice, a discipline, a way of relating to experience that must be learned. Human life is rare because it is the only place where this learning can fully occur. Animals feel pain and pleasure, but they do not reflect on impermanence. Divine or blissful states experience pleasure, but lack urgency. Humans feel the friction of change intensely enough to question it. This questioning is sacred, but only if it is pursued honestly. Otherwise, it becomes anxiety. I believe this is why so many people feel vaguely lost, even when life appears successful. The human mind senses that it is capable of more than survival and stimulation. It senses that something essential is being neglected. And when that intuition is ignored, it manifests as emptiness. Not dramatic emptiness. A quiet one. A dull ache. A sense of living on the surface of things. This is not failure. It is a signal. The danger of human life is not that we suffer. It is that we normalize suffering so completely that we stop questioning it. We accept chronic dissatisfaction as adulthood. We label exhaustion as ambition. We call numbness stability. And then we wonder why joy feels fleeting and peace feels unfamiliar. Buddhism offers a stark contrast. It says this life is too rare to sleep through. Not in the sense of constant effort or self-improvement, but in the sense of attention, of presence, of willingness to look directly at what is happening in the mind and body, moment by moment. Awakening, in Buddhism, is not an achievement. It is an alignment between awareness and reality as it is, rather than as we wish it to be. And this alignment is fragile. It can be strengthened, or it can be ignored. This is why human life is dangerous, because it gives us just enough power to either free ourselves or entangle ourselves further. We can turn awareness into wisdom or into strategy. We can use intelligence to simplify life or to complicate it endlessly. We can use self-reflection to soften the ego or to reinforce it. No other form of existence carries this risk. This is not meant to inflate human importance. It is meant to sharpen human responsibility. When Buddhism says human birth is precious, it does not mean we are special. It means the opportunity is special. And opportunities do not last forever. Every moment of inattention is a missed opening. Every moment of awareness is a return. And here is the part I find most humbling. Awakening does not require extraordinary circumstances. It does not require withdrawal from life. It does not require perfection. It requires honesty. Honesty about suffering. Honesty about craving. Honesty about fear. Honesty about impermanence. Most of us avoid this honesty not because it is painful, but because it destabilizes the stories we rely on to feel secure. But those stories are already unstable. Buddhism simply asks us to notice that fact. Human life is dangerous because it allows self-deception on a massive scale. We can spend decades refining an identity that has nothing to do with freedom. We can become experts at managing symptoms while ignoring causes. We can succeed externally while remaining internally fragmented. And no one will stop us. There is no external force ensuring that we use this life wisely. No cosmic supervisor checking our progress. No guarantee that insight will arise before death. This is why Buddhism speaks with urgency, not panic, but clarity. The urgency is not about fear of punishment. It is about respect for rarity. You do not squander what you truly value. And yet, we squander attention constantly. We scatter it across screens, worries, ambitions, and narratives. We treat awareness as disposable. We assume it will always be there when we finally decide to look. This assumption is dangerous, not because awareness disappears, but because habits harden. The longer we avoid presence, the more foreign it feels. The more we distract ourselves, the louder the mind becomes when we stop. And eventually, stillness can feel threatening. This is how human life is wasted, not dramatically, but quietly. I want to say this with care and emphasis: you do not need to do anything extraordinary to honor this life. You need to pay attention, to question, to notice, to stop running from discomfort long enough to understand it. This is the path Buddhism points to. Not because humans are superior, but because we are capable. Capable of seeing through illusion. Capable of releasing unnecessary suffering. Capable of living without being driven by fear and comparison. That capacity is rare, and rarity implies responsibility. Human life is dangerous because it places the key in our hands and does not tell us what door it opens. We must discover that ourselves. Or not. The universe will not intervene. The choice to wake up or to sleepwalk belongs entirely to us. And that is both the burden and the beauty of being human. At a certain point, the question that once felt so urgent begins to lose its grip. Where do humans come from? After everything, Buddhism has revealed the cycles of worlds, the rise of consciousness, the weight of craving, the birth of society, the rarity of human life, this question no longer stands at the center. It slowly moves to the edge, not because it has been answered, but because it has been surpassed. And this, I believe, is one of the most misunderstood moments on the Buddhist path. Many people assume that spiritual insight delivers explanations, that it fills in the blanks, that it finally tells us how everything started, so we can relax. But Buddhism does something far more radical. It shows us that the origin was never the point. Freedom is. This realization does not arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, almost disappointingly. You notice one day that knowing more about the past does not loosen the present. That tracing causes does not automatically dissolve suffering. That even when you fully understand why you are the way you are, the habits still arise, the reactions still fire, the mind still clings. This is where many seekers get stuck. They become experts in their own history. They can explain their trauma in perfect language. They can map every wound back to its source. They know exactly which experiences shaped which behaviors. And yet, they are no freer than before. This is not because self-understanding is useless. It is because understanding alone does not break the cycle. Buddhism is painfully clear about this. Liberation does not come from knowing why suffering began. It comes from seeing how suffering is being created now. And this distinction changes everything. In my opinion, one of the most seductive traps of modern spirituality is the belief that insight equals transformation. That once we see the pattern, it will dissolve on its own. But patterns are not ideas. They are habits. And habits do not disappear because they are exposed. They disappear when they are no longer fed. This is where Buddhism redirects the entire conversation. Instead of asking where human life came from, it asks something far more intimate and far more demanding. What are you clinging to in this moment? This question is uncomfortable because it removes all abstraction. It does not allow us to hide behind philosophy, history, or identity. It does not care about our story. It cares about our attention. Freedom in Buddhism is not a future achievement. It is a present release. And release is not dramatic. It is subtle. It happens in small moments, again and again. When the mind chooses not to grasp what it usually grasps. When it notices a craving and does not obey it. When it feels fear and does not build a narrative around it. When it experiences discomfort and does not immediately try to escape. This is why origin stories eventually fall away. They point backward. Freedom points inward. The Buddha was not uninterested in origins because they were meaningless. He was uninterested because they were insufficient. They do not address the mechanism of suffering. They do not interrupt the cycle. They do not touch the habit energy that keeps repeating itself, regardless of how much we understand. And this is where I want to be very direct. If your spiritual path is focused entirely on understanding, on collecting insights, explanations, frameworks, you may be moving sideways rather than forward. You may be circling the truth rather than stepping into it. Freedom requires something else, the courage to stop doing what no longer works. That sounds simple. It is not. Because what no longer works is often what feels most familiar. The identity we defend. The stories we repeat. The emotional reactions we justify. The ways we seek control when uncertainty arises. Buddhism asks us to see that these strategies were never designed to free us. They were designed to protect us. And protection, while understandable, often becomes a prison. The shift from origin to freedom is the shift from explanation to practice. Not practice as performance, but practice as relationship. How we relate to thought. How we relate to emotion. How we relate to sensation. How we relate to impermanence. This is where Buddhism becomes uncompromising. It does not promise that understanding your past will heal you. It promises that observing your present can free you. This observation is not passive. It is deeply active. It requires presence. It requires patience. It requires humility. And it requires a willingness to let go of the idea that we should already be somewhere else. Freedom does not ask us to become someone new. It asks us to stop reinforcing what we already are. And here is the paradox that many people struggle with letting go. Does not mean losing something valuable. It means losing what was never able to satisfy us in the first place. We cling to identities because we believe they keep us safe. We cling to narratives because we believe they give us meaning. We cling to explanations because we believe they offer control. But Buddhism gently exposes the flaw in all three beliefs. Safety does not come from identity. It comes from flexibility. Meaning does not come from narrative. It comes from presence. Control does not come from explanation. It comes from understanding impermanence. This understanding is lived, not learned. When Buddhism says origin is not the point, it is not dismissing curiosity. It is pointing out that curiosity, when aimed backward, can become another form of attachment. We become attached to knowing, to certainty, to the comfort of explanation. And attachment, no matter how sophisticated, binds. Freedom, on the other hand, feels unsettling at first because it removes the ground we thought we needed. It invites us to rest in not knowing, to stand in uncertainty without collapsing into fear, to meet life as it unfolds rather than as we imagine it should. This is terrifying for the mind that wants guarantees, but it is deeply relieving for the heart. I have come to believe that the deepest relief humans seek is not the relief of answers, but the relief of not having to defend a self anymore, the relief of not having to be right, the relief of not having to hold everything together. Buddhism offers this relief not as an idea, but as an experience available right now. When you stop identifying with thought, thought loses its authority. When you stop chasing pleasure, pleasure loses its grip. When you stop resisting pain, pain loses its power to define you. This does not eliminate sensation. It eliminates suffering. And this is the point many people miss. Suffering is not pain. Suffering is the struggle with pain. Suffering is not loss. Suffering is the refusal to accept loss. Suffering is not impermanence. Suffering is the demand for permanence. Freedom is the end of that demand. This is why Buddhism does not concern itself with how the universe began. The universe will continue unfolding regardless of our understanding. But suffering unfolds only as long as we feed it. The moment we stop feeding it through craving, aversion, and ignorance, something extraordinary happens. Life does not become perfect. It becomes workable. This is the quiet promise at the heart of Buddhism, not that we will escape the world, but that we can live in it without being enslaved by it. Freedom is not an altered state. It is a different relationship to ordinary experience. You still feel sadness, but it moves. You still feel joy, but you do not cling. You still face uncertainty, but you are not paralyzed by it. This is not transcendence. It is intimacy with reality. And here is where I want to emphasize my personal stance most strongly. Freedom is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not make you special. It does not remove you from the human condition. It simply removes the unnecessary suffering layered on top of it. This is why so many people overlook it. They are waiting for something extraordinary, while freedom is quietly waiting in the ordinary. In the breath you are not controlling. In the thought you are not following. In the emotion you are not resisting. These moments are small, but they accumulate. And over time, they dismantle the structure of suffering from the inside. The origin of humanity does not matter because it does not save us. Freedom does. Freedom from compulsive craving. Freedom from self-obsession. Freedom from the endless need to explain ourselves to ourselves. This freedom does not come from understanding where we came from. It comes from seeing clearly what we are doing now. And this is the final turning of the path. The question that once pointed backward now dissolves into presence. The mind stops searching for a beginning and starts living responsibly in the middle. And in that shift, something profound becomes possible. Not certainty, not perfection, but peace that does not depend on conditions. That peace is not found at the origin of the universe. It is found at the end of resistance. And that is why, in Buddhism, origin was never the point. Freedom was. There is a quiet truth that only becomes visible at the end of a long search where we come from matters far less than where we wake up. After all the questions, all the reflections, all the turning back toward origins and forward toward meaning, Buddhism leaves us, not with a grand conclusion about the universe, but with something much simpler and far more demanding. It leaves us with this moment, not as a concept, not as a metaphor, as reality. We spend much of our lives believing that clarity lives somewhere else. In the past, if only we could understand it. In the future, if only we could reach it. We assume that once we solve the puzzle of origin, personal or cosmic, we will finally feel settled. But what Buddhism reveals, again and again, is that this belief quietly postpones life. I believe this postponement is the deepest tragedy of modern existence. We postpone peace until we feel successful enough. We postpone presence until things calm down. We postpone meaning until we understand ourselves completely. And in the process, we miss the only place where life actually unfolds. The Buddhist path does not lead us away from ordinary life. It leads us back into it with eyes open. After exploring the cycles of worlds, the rise of consciousness, the weight of craving, the birth of society, the danger and rarity of being human, and the promise of freedom, one insight stands above all others. Awakening is not an event. It is a way of relating to experience. This is where many people get disappointed. They expect transformation to feel dramatic, to feel like arrival, to feel like certainty. But awakening, as Buddhism understands it, feels more like honesty. A steady willingness to meet what is happening without distortion. And that honesty is radical. It means noticing when we are lost in thought and gently returning. It means feeling discomfort without immediately escaping it. It means recognizing craving without obeying it. It means allowing joy without clinging to it. None of this makes life extraordinary. It makes life real. The final insight Buddhism offers is not about transcendence. It is about intimacy. Intimacy with impermanence. Intimacy with uncertainty. Intimacy with the fragile, fleeting nature of being alive. When we stop demanding that life guarantee our comfort, something unexpected happens. We become more available to it. In my opinion, this is the most misunderstood aspect of Buddhist wisdom. People think it leads to detachment from the world. In truth, it leads to deeper engagement without the desperation to control outcomes. You still work. You still love. You still plan. But you no longer need these things to define you. This is where waking up truly begins. Not in meditation halls alone, but in kitchens, offices, highways, quiet mornings, and difficult conversations. Awakening shows up when you notice your breath while waiting in line. When you feel anger rise and choose not to weaponize it. When you recognize fear without letting it dictate your actions. This is not a lesser form of spirituality. It is a braver one, because it does not escape life. It meets it. The question, where do humans come from, dissolves here not because it has been answered, but because it no longer governs us. We see that searching for beginnings was never about history. It was about longing, a longing to feel grounded, safe, and at home. Buddhism shows us that home is not found by traveling backward or forward in time. It is found by inhabiting the present without resistance. And this changes how we live. We stop living as if the real moment is always somewhere else. We stop treating awareness as optional. We stop sacrificing now for an imagined later that never quite arrives. We wake up not once, but repeatedly. And waking up is not glamorous. It is subtle. It is ordinary. It is available to anyone willing to pay attention. This, to me, is the deepest gift of the Buddhist view of human origins. It returns responsibility to where it belongs. Not to fate, not to the past, not to the universe, but to awareness itself. We do not need to know how everything began in order to live wisely. We need to know how we are responding right now. That is where freedom lies. This journey began with a question humanity has carried for centuries. Where do humans come from? Buddhism approaches this question not by offering a definitive origin story, but by redirecting our attention towards something more urgent: suffering and its end. Rather than fixating on a first beginning, Buddhism presents time as beginningless, unfolding in vast cycles of creation and dissolution. Worlds arise and pass away. Consciousness emerges, takes form, and gradually becomes burdened by craving, comparison, and attachment. As awareness grows heavier, identity solidifies. Pleasure turns into grasping. Difference turns into hierarchy. From this inner contraction, societies are born: structures shaped by fear, scarcity, and the need for control. Human life emerges as rare and dangerous, not because humans are superior, but because we occupy a unique middle ground, capable of reflection, capable of suffering, and capable of awakening. Yet this capacity is not guaranteed to be fulfilled. Buddhism warns that human life can be wasted through unconsciousness, through distraction, habit, and the refusal to look directly at experience. Understanding origins, whether cosmic or personal, does not free us. Freedom arises only when we see how suffering is created moment by moment and stop feeding it. The story ultimately reveals that origin was never the point. Freedom is freedom from compulsive craving, freedom from rigid identity, freedom from the demand that life be permanent and predictable. This freedom does not remove pain, but it ends suffering. It is found not in the past or the future, but in the present, when awareness meets reality without resistance. The Buddhist path leads us back to ordinary life, inviting us to wake up within it. Not dramatically, but honestly. Again and again. The core lessons and how to apply them in daily life. The deepest lesson of this entire journey is simple, but challenging: your life is happening now. And awareness is the doorway to freedom. You can apply this by noticing when you are lost in thought and gently returning to the present. Observing craving without immediately acting on it. Allowing emotions to arise without identifying with them. Letting impermanence soften your grip rather than frighten you. You do not need to escape modern life to practice this. You need to meet it more honestly. Freedom grows in small moments of awareness, repeated consistently. Closing question and call to action. Now I'd love to hear from you. What part of this journey resonated with you the most? Do you agree that origin matters less than awakening in the present moment? How do you personally understand the idea of waking up in daily life? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can all learn from each other. If this reflection spoke to you, please support the journey by subscribing to Buddhism in every moment. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that brings ancient wisdom into modern life. Subscribe, stay present, and walk this path with us one mindful moment at a time. This entire journey began with a question that has followed humanity across time: where do humans come from? At first, it appears to be a question about history, science, or cosmology. But as we followed the Buddhist perspective deeper, the question slowly transformed. It revealed itself not as a search for a beginning, but as a search for meaning, relief, and understanding in the midst of life itself. Buddhism does not answer this question by pointing to a single moment of creation. Instead, it invites us to see existence as a vast, beginningless flow, worlds arising and dissolving, consciousness taking form, identities forming through craving and comparison, societies emerging from fear and scarcity. Within this endless movement, human life appears not as a destination, but as a rare and fragile opportunity. What makes human existence special is not power, intelligence, or dominance. It is awareness. Humans suffer enough to question, yet have just enough clarity to awaken. But this same clarity carries risk. We can either wake up or remain distracted. We can either see through craving or build entire lives around it. Buddhism does not promise that awakening will happen automatically. It reminds us that unconsciousness is always the easier path. As the story unfolded, one truth became unmistakable: understanding our origin does not free us. Knowing the past does not end suffering. Even the most accurate explanations cannot save us from fear, loss, or impermanence. What frees us is not information, but relationship: how we relate to our thoughts, emotions, desires, and the changing nature of life. The Buddhist path gently but firmly turns our attention back to the present moment. Not as an escape, but as the only place where freedom is possible. Awakening is not a dramatic event. It is a quiet, repeated choice to meet experience without grasping, without resisting, without turning it into a story about who we are supposed to be. In the end, the question, where do humans come from, fades not because it has been answered, but because it is no longer needed. What matters is not where we began, but whether we are awake now. Whether we are living consciously, honestly, and compassionately within the fleeting gift of this life. This is the heart of the Buddhist message. Freedom does not wait in the past or the future. It is available here, in this breath, in this moment, if we are willing to see clearly. The deepest lesson from this journey is this: your life is not meant to be figured out, but to be lived consciously. You can apply this by noticing when you are lost in thought and gently returning to the present. Observing craving without immediately acting on it. Allowing emotions without letting them define you. Accepting impermanence instead of fighting it. You do not need to change your life to wake up. You need to change how you meet it. Small moments of awareness, repeated daily, slowly dissolve suffering. Now, we would love to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Do you believe awakening matters more than understanding our origins? How do you practice presence in your daily life? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your perspective. If this reflection moved you, please subscribe to Buddhism in Every Moment. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content that brings ancient wisdom into modern life. Subscribe, stay mindful, and walk this path with us one moment at a time.